Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for being here again. It's 7 p.m. here in Warsaw, Poland, and it's starting to get a little cooler as summer winds down and we start moving towards autumn. But I hope you guys are having a lovely day. So yeah, Tom Bunnytail and Porfirio, welcome. Good to see you guys. So yeah, and as everyone comes in, thanks all for being here. Looking forward to having this conversation with you. This is about the Reformation, and this is a very serious question. Welcome, Philip, Ignatius. So this is a very serious question. Where was your church before Luther? During the Reformation, this was a question that Catholic theologians would ask the Protestants, the Reformers. And this was something that they had severe difficulty answering. And we want to go through this history. It's something that one, I believe, has to examine. Villainous, welcome. I covered this before with Mal from Sneakers Corner, now Islamic Origins, but I want to do another take on this one because there's a few older slides I'm going back through and trying to do a little bit more research and taking a different angle, examining other aspects that I may have missed. This is the paper this is based on by S.J. Barnett. Where was your church before Luther? Claims to the antiquity of Protestantism examined. And he opens with, and this paper is easily found. It's publicly available. It's in my archive as well as on the internet. During and after the Reformation, one of the most pressing issues for Protestants was to locate an appropriate answer to a disarmingly simple Catholic question. Where was your church before Luther? Really interesting. And I'm going to give you my conclusions up front. Welcome, Karen. Welcome, Catherine. Hello, Joel. Sorry. Yeah, so I'm going to give you my conclusions up front, so you guys don't have to wonder what I think. I think everyone should know at this point, unless you're new to the channel, what I think and why I say the things that I do. But we're going to find that Protestant historical claims will prove to be bankrupt. And we're going to look at the strength of the Catholic position by comparison. So this is from National Geographic, just a little point of interest, a little history tidbit that they've put out on the Protestant Reformation. They say it was a religious reform movement that swept through Europe in the 1500s. It resulted in the creation of a branch of Christianity called Protestantism, a name used collectively to refer to many religious groups that separated from the Roman Catholic Church due to differences in doctrine. It began in Wittenberg, Germany. This is a link to the original article. Let me just bring it up for 1 second, just so you can see the article itself. That is it here. This is from National Geographic Education, right? So that is a real article. You can look that up. Protestant Reformation, National Geographic Education. So the Reformation began in Wittenberg, Germany, October 31st, 1517, when Martin Luther, a teacher and a monk, published a document he called Disputation on the Power of Indulgences, or the 95 Theses. The document was a series of 95 ideas about Christianity that he invited people to debate with him. These ideas were controversial because they directly contradicted Catholic teachings. Now, Porfirio says here, Protestantism is really nothing more than the recycling of the ancient Christian heresies that were condemned prior to the Reformation. That is not entirely true. It's a recycling of a number of Christian heresies, or actually, maybe what you're saying is correct. I just phrased that differently. It's actually a recycling of a number of heresies. So it's a mixture of them. And in fact, various reformers would pick and choose their own heresies and, mix it in with Christian beliefs, and Bob's your uncle. So, yeah, but we'll have a look through that. We'll definitely get through that. So now, these ideas, of course, were controversial because they contradicted the Catholic Church teachings. They were looking to supplant, to replace. Now, Luther's statements challenged the Catholic Church's role as intermediary between people and God. And the Protestant Reformation that began with Martin Luther in 1517 played a key role in the development of the North American colonies and the eventual United States. Now, I'm not going to go into that. That's a much longer discussion they have elsewhere. It's not really that important to this particular, it's an important issue, but not important to this discussion right now. Now, there's another paper that I will also briefly cite, were the Albigenses and Waldenses forerunners of the Reformation. This is by Daniel Walter, and it says here, do not think, brethren, that heresies can be produced by a few small souls. Only great men have created heresies, and that is St. Augustine. Now, I'll briefly cite what he says here. When a religious movement comes into existence, it tends to consider itself as autochthonous phenomenon. That is basically a native and original phenomenon. Obviously, every reform movement has elements of newness and originality. Martin Luther was not at first concerned about spiritual ancestors. So originally, there was no issue about wanting to tie himself back to the apostolic lineage. He says, "We have come to this point without guide and without a Bohemian doctor." Likewise, in Geneva, Theodore de Beze said that Calvin came when God had appointed the time. So this was supposedly a sudden sprouting of a new idea, an idea whose time had come. Calvin himself, when asked by Charles V how Reformation came about, remarked that a man cannot bring about a Reformation, and only God has the means to bring this about. So they were saying this is a new divinely inspired movement. The Reformers did not need to seek their origins, since, as was stated by St. Ignatius when he spoke of the Orthodox Christians of his time, they have their being rooted in the gospel. Note, the Reformers were not claiming a historical lineage in the apostolic lineage, in the apostolic succession. They were saying, no, we're gospel-based. And that's going to be interesting later. So just so you know, that document is here, and you can find it online with the Albigenses and Waldenses, Forerunners of the Reformation, by Daniel Walter. Now, I don't necessarily agree with every single conclusion that an author may make, but these documents are useful. They certainly bring up some interesting points for me to research further. So, were the Waldensians and Albigensians the Reformation's forerunners? And why does he ask this question? Well, it's because the Reformers claimed that they were. Now, he critically examines Protestant claims of historical continuity and legitimacy. And this is central because Protestants during and after the Reformation pointed to groups like the Waldensians and the Albigensians and Paulicians and you name it, dozens of them, as evidence that their beliefs and practices existed long before Martin Luther. This was their reply to, where was your church before Luther? They said, well, the Paulicians and the Albigensians and the Arians and all of those guys, that is very, that kind of does get to that. Yes, I've got on speed dial. Villainous says, why is it that the idea of double predestination has such seductive power over man? That's, I think, so you can condemn people and put yourself in a circle of light and just condemn others who stand in darkness, right? I don't know, it just seems to be a desire to condemn, to be God and judge over others. I mean, that's one reason I think that I've come to, a conclusion I've come to. So they claimed these groups, they had practices that existed long before Martin Luther, to give Martin Luther a pedigree, to say, no, this is a long, ancient, old historical practice, right? And they wanted to provide a historical, an apostolic pedigree that is independent of the Catholic Church. Remember, they were protesting the Catholic Church. So they wanted to provide themselves some kind of legitimacy. Now, you have to investigate whether these groups actually held doctrines or practices similar to those of the Reformers. I mean, they're pointing to these guys and saying, well, yeah, we're just following these ancient Christians. And so, our ideas are not new. These are not new ideas. We didn't just make them up. These are old ideas. These are old Christian ideas. And so we want to see, what did these groups really believe? Do they believe the same things as the Reformers? Because we want to test their assertions that their movement was a restoration of early, authentic, original Christianity, of true apostolic Christianity, rather than some sort of crazy innovation, which is the claim that they were making. I think it's not going to be a spoiler for me to spoil this by saying that we'll find that the Protestants were very sorely disappointed and then swept all of this under the rug because, let's say the evidence wasn't kind to their claims. So this is very true, Joel Thomas. They were, and genuinely, legitimately, they were trying to find some kind of historical legitimacy, right? Porfirio says, I recall during my time as a Protestant when the Waldensians and Albigensians were being praised, but people really didn't know what they believed in. Yes, exactly. And they shot themselves in the foot, but they left that behind in the 1800s. But we're going to have a look at some of this and see. Other groups and denominations would later come along and hold on to restorationist principles and the whole trail of blood belief. That's the Baptists, but that's a story I will get to in the future, not to worry. I've been meaning to talk about that. So, okay, were they a restorationist movement? Were they an innovation? Were they legitimate? Were they heretical? Were they crazy? Well, we're going to find out. Now, both groups were labeled heretical. That's the Waldensians and the Albigensians were labeled heretical by the medieval church, and their beliefs diverged significantly from Protestant theology. For instance, the Albigensians were dualists. They were Gnostics. And we'll come to a little bit more detail on this whole dualism later, but think of it as they believed in two gods. One god was the dark god who created matter, and there was the light god, the good god, who was made of spirit, and they were enemies. And the good god, well, maybe he was Lucifer, whomever he was, but the bad god is called Yahweh. You might know him from the Bible, and he created matter, and he was bad, and he was evil. His name was Yahweh. You might have heard of him somewhere. So they rejected all of the Orthodox Christian doctrines. So let's have a brief look at Reformation historical revisionism. Now, this exposes the problem of historical revisionism, whether it is legitimate to claim spiritual ancestry from groups whose beliefs were in many cases totally incompatible with Reformation principles. So in the paper, he challenges the narrative that the Reformation was just a revival of suppressed true Christianity rather than a new theological development. Now, the Albigensians had a dualistic or Gnostic worldview. They believed in two co-equal gods, two gods. One is good, he's spirit, and one is evil, matter, the god of matter and the god of spirit, which fundamentally contradicted Orthodox Christian monotheism and the goodness of creation. So now for Protestants saying, well, I personally as a Protestant, I don't believe in the Waldensians. I don't endorse the Albigensians. Well, the spiritual fathers, the early church fathers of Protestantism did. And your church comes out of those people. Those people believed this nonsense. They supported this nonsense. They endorsed it. They called these people good Christians that the Catholic Church unfairly oppressed and suppressed when these were true Christians of the way. And those Catholics were so nasty in trying to suppress these good, true Christians who had these whack job beliefs. Unfortunately, all of the Protestant denominations, all of them are guilty of this. So, yes, they do Gnostic a lot, Joel. When you confuse theology with political power, you betray the faith. Yes, and we will talk a bit about that. Yeah, so let me see. Now, let's continue. Now, of course, this led them to reject core Christian doctrines. So, for instance, these Albigensians denied the incarnation. Jesus was not God. That goes against the Antichrist test in John 1:1, that you must believe that Jesus Christ is born of a virgin, that he was born as a man, lived as a man, died as a man, and was resurrected in his body, which is the same era of the Sadducees who denied the resurrection. As I recall, Jesus was not very fond of the Sadducees. So they denied the incarnation, they denied the resurrection of the body, they denied the sacraments, and this is the point where the people who founded their churches on the basis of the people who praised these Albigensians now need to say, yeah, we agree with them. There is no incarnation. That is false. There's no resurrection of the body. That's false. Yep. We agree with the Albigensians, and we're the best Christians ever, because the forebears of Protestantism agreed with these Albigensians. So yeah, these guys are number one. So yeah, let me see. If God became man, matter, evil, and dualistic nonsense. Exactly. Yes, Mick says, yes, I read it like that, the little I've read on them. Yeah. Can you please show the sources about the Catholics oppressing other Christians? I'm not here to go through that aspect of it, because that's the common claim. The Catholics murdered 50 million people in Europe. I mean, we don't have time to go down little side roads and get confused and lost. Understand? But also, if you spend time on the channel, you know I tend to use a lot of figures of speech and sarcasm. So, yeah. So now, and if you think that was a gotcha, I'm sorry, you're going to have to try a little harder and pay a bit more attention. So now, but anyway, we're now talking about the failings of Protestant history. So let's have a look at that. So Marcus, I don't have a lot of patience with people who want to interject their own agendas. I really do not. The simple thing is, I'm not here to talk about that. That was just a figure of speech based on Protestant claims. I was not making a claim. You are misunderstanding. Now, you can either clean up the misunderstanding from me trying to take the time out of my talk now to explain to you, no, I was not making the claim. I am paraphrasing a common Protestant claim. I'm here to discuss false Protestant history, though, and where they base their theology on. But if you want to get sidetracked, then I would suggest you just sit down, be quiet, and please listen. So anyway, so these Albigensians rejected the incarnation, they rejected resurrection of the body and the sacraments. So next, the Albigensians, also known as the Cathars, they were a religious movement in southern France during the 12th and 13th centuries. They were considered heretics by the Catholic Church due to their dualistic Gnostic beliefs. And okay, I'm going to be nice. I'll put you in timeout for 24 hours. How's that? So now, they were considered heretics by the Catholic Church, right, because of their Gnostic beliefs, because they were hardcore Gnostics. Now, of course, their beliefs and practices eventually led to the Albigensian Crusade, which was a conflict aimed at eradicating their heresy. That's a topic I will cover in the future, but of course, let's not get distracted right now. Now, let's talk about proto-Protestantism or pre-Protestantism. These are individuals and movements that had ideas similar to Protestantism before 1517, because at the time when I started to discuss Martin Luther and bring to light the fact that Martin Luther was, I'll be polite here, a theological fraud and a complete nut job, based on his own writings, based on what we can actually read from the man's own writings, wanting to murder all of the disabled because they are, I don't know, demonic, just demonic bodies that are owned by Satan and they should all be killed. Things of that type. People going, well, hold on, Martin Luther's got nothing to do with the Reformation. I kept hearing that a lot all of a sudden. But oddly enough, historians tend to tell us that, Martin Luther had something to do with the Reformation. Maybe he's kicked it off. And that's why we had the 500-year anniversary of Martin Luther and the Reformation in 2017. He might be a little bit important there. Okay, but they were saying, no, we have antecedents. Prior to Martin Luther, there were a bunch of people. So really, Luther was a schizo. So now before Luther and Calvin, some leaders tried to reform Christianity, right? At least in their own image. So the main pre-Reformation forerunners were Peter Waldo, John Wycliffe, and Jan Hus. Luther himself saw it important to have forerunners of his views. So Luther wanted to base himself in history. So he praised people that, let's just say, are questionable, like Savonarola, Lorenzo Valla, Wessel Gansford, who was a nominalist and inspired Zwingli. If you read Zwingli, he reads like he's a 5-year-old, and other groups. Okay, and of course, Luther himself was a nominalist. Rick Hampstead, welcome. Good to see you. All right, so now, according to Edmund Hammer Broadbent in the book The Pilgrim Church, you can see it in the background here, many Christian sects, cults, and movements foreshadowed the teachings of what became the Protestant movements. Of course, Martin Luther focused all of that, and then he made it into a doctrine, right? So now he looked at many groups, such as the Paulicians, known to be heretics, the Bogomils, known heretics, Nestorians, also a little off track here, the Waldensians, the Anabaptists, the Hutterites, the Methodists, the Russian Mennonites, and the Mennonite Brethren. He looked at a whole swathe of these groups. Now, the Paulicians, for instance, and these are all groups that the Protestants were claiming, we're based in history because, look, we go back to these guys who were in the 3rd century, and the 4th century, and the 12th century, and the 10th century. We belong to these guys, these good Christians that don't believe in God, believe that Yahweh is evil and reject the resurrection and reject Jesus as God, but they were fantastic Christians, and we are based in those groups who were original. Okay, fine. Now, the Paulicians rejected the sacraments. They rejected veneration of the cross. I wonder, does the cross have anything to do with Christianity? Someone help me out here. And of course, they rejected much of the Old Testament. They wanted to throw much of it out, like Marcion as well as Martin Luther. They held a dualistic theology. Again, they were Gnostic. That sharply deviated from Nicene Christianity's doctrine of the Trinity, the Incarnation, and a visible physical church. The Bogomils were dualistic in worldview. They denied the sacraments, again, Gnostics. They denied the authority of an institutional church. They denied the incarnation. They denied the Trinity and the veneration of the cross. I think that makes them fantastic Protestants, or at least there's a good reason why Protestants would go, well, actually, we can trace our history back all the way to the Bogomils, because those were great Christians. You can see why all of this was swept under the rug, because it gets a little embarrassing once you dig. Yeah, Martin Luther was a hardcore nominalist. I've covered that before in my previous Luther series. He was a hardcore nominalist. It is insane that he can do that. So, yeah, he was a cuckoo for sure. No, 100%. Yeah, except, kind of like Bruce Lee, take what I like, throw away the rest. But they weren't, they weren't as cool, that's for sure. Okay. Some of the ideas that they stole from was Montanism and Tertullian. So Montanists were a sect of ascetics that were against many developments in the early church. They wanted to go back to the most severe basics, right? And Tertullian converted into this group. Now, parallels have been drawn between Montanism and modern-day movements such as Pentecostalism, including Oneness Pentecostals and the Charismatic movement. Now, the central issue with Oneness Pentecostals is their rejection of the Trinity, asserting that God is a single person who manifests in different modes, or modalism. That's the heresy of modalism. In other words, it's like Jesus is now the Son, and then he goes and changes clothes, puts on a new face, and now he's the Father, and then he goes and does something else, changes clothes, puts on a new face, and now he's the Holy Spirit. So he holds different roles at different times, right? And he's not three divine persons or three distinct holy persons in one essence. He's he's a schizo made up of three different personalities completely. And that's modalism. Villeneuve says, yeah, this isn't protesting issues with the church. It's trying to find alternative religions. Is the word Protestant even legitimate? Yeah, one has to ask. I mean, I've simplified this, but once you go into these histories, this is why this was a massive issue between 1600, the writings on this in the church, the Protestant side of it. There's a huge amount of for 200 years, from the 1500s up into the 1700s, towards the end of the 1700s. This was a massive issue, and it got dropped, and they found a whole new shtick, which we shall talk about. But yes, this is here. Then listening to the Spirit very much foreshadows Protestant reactions to papal claims. You see some of that 200 to 400 lineage through this group of whack jobs. Porfirio Santiago de Guzman that I cited first. Major church figures from every single Protestant denomination. Just sad. Something strange just happened there. I just got kicked off the stream for a second. Okay, so we have technical difficulties, yeah, but I'm back. Okay, these anti-Dicomarians, basically they are anti-Mary, right? They refused to give Mary any special status, and they denied her perpetual virginity. Now, their positions on Mary became the standard in many Protestant sects. Joseph, they considered a widower with 6 children. They considered Joseph a widower with 6 children already from a previous marriage. Where did they get this information? Well, they got it from apocryphal works. Now, remember, Martin Luther took what was in the Bible. Jesus used the Septuagint. That was the Bible used, which contained a number of books which Protestants eventually threw out of the canon. They rejected them as canonical because they said these books were not good enough, even though St. Paul, St. Peter, and Jesus himself used that Bible. That was the actual Bible of the Jews 2,000 years ago. But these Protestants were nice enough to take apocryphal works that came from the mid-2nd century, like the Proto-Evangelium of James, also called the Infancy Gospel of James, a known fake work. It's known Gnostic fiction, and they use that to say, well, you see, our theology is based on this really good Christian work. So yeah, you might notice that that there's a yes, I am back. You might notice there's a little bit of a problem here with this history, right? So yeah. So just so you know, I have a gigabit internet connection. I have landline, and I've got a physical cable running into this computer. I'm physically running wires. I'm not to the routers. I'm not using Wi-Fi. But yeah, sometimes I guess it does happen. Tom Bunnytail says it's obvious they want to find a way around the truth that the church has taught. Yes, I mean, they did protest. They did reject the church. So yes. So anyway, so that's an interesting point here. Now, Saint Epiphanius of Salamis, he's a 4th century bishop of Cyprus. He described these people as heretical in his book called Panarion. It's also known as Adversus Hereses, right? Against the heresies. Just so you know, hereses comes from a Greek word, I believe. It means to choose. And what this implies is that they will pick and choose what they like and reject what they don't like. So they'll choose certain things. They'll choose verses they like and reject any verses that go against their theology. That's what a heresy is, to choose, but to choose in a very limited fashion, in a very biased fashion. So let me see. Oh, Catherine says, I remember the reference to Joseph being an old man with children in my Bible in the 1960s. Well, yeah, but there's no evidence in the canonical Bible, but it is in the apocryphal Gospels. Why would it be part of Protestant teaching? Understand? It's just bizarre. Now, other people that were drawn upon are Arius of Sebastia. There's a whole bunch of them. I've just picked a few, for example. Seen as a forerunner of the Reformation by some Protestants, he attacked monasticism, no monks. He denied fasting commandments, and he denied the episcopal polity. So basically the structure of the church, right? Having a pope, a magisterium, having any kind of structure that it was basically every man for himself. Yes, heresy is basically cherry picking. There's definitely truth in that. Yeah. Okay, so Helvidius, he was seen by some Protestants as a forerunner of the Reformation. He opposed the doctrine of the perpetual virginity of Mary and monasticism, and he was attacked by St. Jerome. A point you might take away from this is that Christina has become a member. Wow, thank you very much, Christine. Great to have you as a member. Thank you for joining. Do appreciate the support. So thank you. So notice that these Protestants are all over the place. They don't have a single unified truth, a single unified narrative, a single unified story. They are Heavy Hand 3 donated $9.99. Thank you very much. Well, he says, thank you for the hard work. Protestants need to know these truths. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is all very well documented. So I really do appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for the hard work. Protestants need to know these truths. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. And yes, this is why I do these videos. I will be tackling Catholicism again. I'll be going through the SSPX and other groups, and but I've had to push that back because I've got a backlog of things that I'm busy working on, and but I will be doing Catholicism as well. I'll be tackling that soon as well. So, but notice all of these guys are all over the place, but all the Protestants were picking, I'm with that guy, and all of these people are in some way extremely wrong. Yeah, heresy is disagreeing with, yes. So now he was attacked by Jerome. Now who was Jerome? Again, so against Helvidius, the perpetual virginity of Blessed Mary. This is from about 383 AD that Jerome writes this. He says, You have, O Helvidius, compelled me to enter the lists and to write upon the perpetual virginity of the Blessed Mary, and to defend myself by refuting your objections. You say that Mary did not remain a virgin. I claim still more that Joseph himself, on account of Mary, was a virgin, so that from a virgin wedlock, a virgin son was born. So that's an early church father. Who was he? St. Jerome lived from about 347 to about 420. He was a very highly learned Latin church father. What denomination is this channel? Does that really matter? Does it genuinely matter? I mean, if I said I was Catholic, is every word I say completely wrong? If I said it was the 21st of August at 7:31, would I be wrong automatically because I'm Catholic? Does every single fact? These are very well provable facts, very easily provable facts, well established. And for your information, I was raised Anglican, which means I was raised in the Anglican Church, the Church of England. And no, I'm not a Catholic, just so you know. Now, moving on. So, now, of course, if you're a Protestant, based on the fact that we can see that Protestants were a little lost, to say it politely, historically, anything you say, I might just need to reject because it's coming from a Protestant. I mean, if that's how people are going to argue, then, yeah. So, anywho. Yeah, Jerome, in contrast to a common argument that Joseph had a previous marriage. Yeah, so certainly you do. Let me see. Joel says it's interesting that Luther and other reformers held to the perpetual virginity. The modern day members of Reformed churches have a lot of mental gymnastics to get over it. Yes. Yeah. So let's go on. So Jerome was a Latin church father, very highly learned. He was a biblical scholar and a monastic leader, and he was known for translating the Bible into Latin, known as the Vulgate, one of the most important translations of the Bible. He was born in Dalmatia, which is basically just here above Italy. You'll see it here. That's just above Italy there. And so he became a priest and then a secretary to Pope Damasus I. And about 389, he established a monastery in Bethlehem itself. His works, including his commentaries and letters, were profoundly influenced the Middle Ages. And he's considered a doctor of the church. So he's not a nobody. Now we come to Jovinian and Jovinianism. So he died about 405 AD. Now, he's a 4th century theologian. He challenged the wave of asceticism in the 4th century. He challenged the exaltation of virginity. He denied the perpetual virginity of Mary. And he believed that there's no difference between abstaining from food and enjoying your food. Whether you fast or whether you eat, yeah, it's the same thing. As far as he was concerned. Yeah, no, that is true. Yeah, people do think if you're potentially Catholic that you are therefore wrong. I know it's insane, but that's just how it is. So these are the ideas that this guy had. So he taught a perseverance doctrine very similar to John Calvin, and he said that only the truly regenerate will persevere to the end. Some have also said Jovinian held grace-oriented salvation views similar to the Reformation, and sometimes he was praised as an early forerunner of the Reformation. It has been argued that Jovinian believed in a distinction between the visible and the invisible churches. Now, he may not have. I mean, who knows? That's a little ambiguous right now. But just notice that these arguments were very important. The invisible and the visible church, these were arguments that were being made by the reformers at the time as ways to either dodge issues where they were required to answer questions or to provide substantiation of the claims or whatever, or they were trying to assert an idea, right? So these were important arguments at the time, and we will explore some of these a little bit more. So this is all based on his statement that the church is founded on faith. In other words, I believe, therefore I'm the church. I'm part of the church. And so for the person who asked me, is this a Catholic channel? You see, I have faith, therefore I'm the church, therefore I can't be wrong because the Holy Spirit's inspiring me. Therefore, no one can tell me I'm wrong because the Holy Spirit is talking through me and has laid this message on my heart, and therefore I'm sharing it with you, so I can't be wrong because it's the message of the Holy Spirit. Thank you very much. Pretty much how that works. And he said then that all in the church are taught by God, and that no unripe members exist within the church, and that no one can enter the church by fraud. Thank heavens. Everyone is taught by God. In other words, you have the Holy Spirit on direct speed dial, So you are taught directly by God because you have faith. Therefore, you can't be wrong, and you cannot enter the church by fraud. Thank heavens, as we know, the church, the Christian church, has exactly a 100% record of zero fraud. Not a single fraud in church history, not one, as Jovinian has told us, because no one can enter the church by fraud, because faith and the Holy Spirit prevent that from ever happening. I mean, if anyone can think of any frauds, any Christian frauds whatsoever, I dare you, I challenge you to list them, because Jovinian said that can't happen. It's never happened. There's never been theological Christian fraud ever, because Jovinian said so, because he had the Holy Spirit and you have faith, and therefore God talks to you and you have voices in your head. That's sarcasm, by the way, and I think you might see that this is a little naive at best, juvenile, if not utterly ludicrous and completely stupid. You'd have to be a retard to believe that. Thanks, Jovinian. So, it's been said, right? So he was condemned. As a heretic at synods convened in Rome under Pope Siricius and in Milan by Ambrose in 393 because of his views. And our information about him is derived principally from the work of Jerome in two books, the Adversus Jovinianum. Anthony Gloria, I actually did reveal my denomination. You weren't listening. I actually said it. I said it. I said exactly which church I belong to. I said exactly which church I grew up in. I told you. I said the words. I gave the answer. Either you're deaf or you weren't listening. Go back 5 minutes to when you asked the question. I answered your question directly and unambiguously. Okay? Now, either there's a problem with your hearing, or maybe you need to turn your speakers up. Okay, I think it's suspicious that your ears aren't working correctly. So, moving on. This is another article from Church History. This is you can see the DOI number. So this is Cambridge University Press, a research article. Waldensianism before Waldo, the myth of apostolic proto-Protestantism in antebellum American anti-Catholicism. And in fact, if you look at the English, they were extremely anti-Catholic, as well as in the US, certainly. So Waldensianism before Waldo. So that's an interesting article, something as well that could be of interest to people. But this question has been examined. What we're discussing has been examined academically. And the answers are, not good for Protestantism. So he writes here, between 1820 and 1850, American presses generated an enormous amount of literature devoted to the myth of apostolic Waldensianism. Finally, it has now been finally admitted that all of these Protestants for 200 years who were claiming that they came from the Waldensians were the original Christians, genuine, true Christians, didn't even believe in Jesus, whatever, but like all good Christians do, I suppose. But it's known academically that these were completely farcical claims. Every single Protestant denomination is guilty of this. Anthony, I'm going to do this once. I have little patience. I said I was Anglican, the Church of England. I said so. I'm going to speak slowly. Anglican, Church of England. Okay, I said it now again. If you need me to write it in crayon and hold it up for you to read, let me know. So anyway, so though the Waldenses began as a lay reform movement, good intentions, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions by lay reformers. In the 12th century, speculations about their apostolic origin were popularized in the 17th and 18th centuries. In other words, myths were made up about, yes, we are actually truly apostolic church because we go back to the Waldensians and then they go back to Jesus. Right, so now... Okay, so I'm not sure what's so funny about saying Anglican. I'm not so sure what's so funny about that, but perhaps you want to define. I'll give you one opportunity. As I said, I don't have a lot of patience. Okay, do you know that 73% of evangelicals in America don't believe that Jesus is God? Do you realize that something like 60% of them don't believe in the Trinity? These people claim to be good Christians, but they are Arians. They are actually heretics. So a vast swathe of American quote-unquote Christians are fake. I should have known by the accent. He says, no, I'm not English. I'm South African. I'm not English. I'm South African. So, okay, moving on. Enough nonsense and distractions now. So, moving on. Let's continue. Now, the historical construction, this false historical construction gave American Protestants a versatile rhetorical weapon against an increasingly encroaching Roman Catholicism. What was happening was the Roman Catholic Church was actually making strides. People were accepting the theology in the church, and there was a dissatisfaction with the fracturing within the Protestant movement. So now, the apostolicity of Waldensianism, the supposed, allowed the Protestants to trace their teachings not only to Scripture, but through the Middle Ages and the early church, providing a ready answer to Catholic accusations of Protestant novelty. Again, the question is, where was your church before Luther? And of course, they said, no, we definitely look at the Waldensians. They were the good guys. They were true Christians, and we were them. Additionally, re-narrating the history of Waldensian persecution at the hand of Catholics reinforced nativist conceptions of Catholicism as a violently tyrannical religion. What they were doing was they were simply making claims that demonized Catholics. So rather than being able to prove their lineage, their apostolic and historical lineage, and the validity of their beliefs, as opposed to their beliefs and views being completely novel or heretical, they took the opportunity to vilify Catholics. So once they could demonize and vilify the other side, they didn't have to worry about proving their case, because it was easier to simply just vilify Catholics than to prove their historical position, because their historical position was looking like a bunch of nonsense, because it was. So this then became a call to action for Protestants to resist Rome's attempt to gain power in the United States. Yeah, trying to play the victim card. Exactly. That's very, very much it. So let me see. I have no idea what Anthony just said, but I'm missing it. Whatever it was, couldn't have been important. Okay. So also a large Irish Catholic influx during those years due to being starved out by the Brits. Excellent point. Thank you very much. Yeah, the Brits were not always good people, right? Philip's American, so he should know what he's talking about there. Okay, so let's move on. Yeah, non-denominational doesn't make sense. So anyway, through the myth, so though the myth of apostolic Waldensianism was very widely held by American Protestants, by 1850 it became historically unsupportable. It was clearly a ridiculous false position. American Protestants were claiming apostolic lineage through a bunch of flaming heretics. It's exactly the same as these American Protestants going, but you see, we trace our lineage to Muhammad, and he's the original Christian, and therefore we're part of the line of Jesus, and then the apostles, and then to Muhammad, and then through these Buddhists, and therefore we can prove that we are original Christians. It's as ridiculous as that. So historians on both sides of the Atlantic, typo, contextualize the group as a medieval phenomenon rather than the remnant of apostolic Protestantism, because they're clearly heretical. Bit of a typo, but that was taken from the paper that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so now the question, a logical and historical analysis. Where was your church before Luther isn't just a polemical challenge. It was a direct attack on a central logical premise of Protestantism, namely the idea of restoration or restorationism. And I've covered restorationism before in a different talk, and it's hysterically funny if it wasn't so sad. So the question can be rephrased as, if the church you claim to be the true one that was founded by the apostles, where's it been for 1,500 years? Where's your church been for 1,500 years? So the logical problem for Protestants from an external and critical viewpoint is that they must argue for one of two things, both of which have significant historical and logical difficulties. So they claim the church was a small hidden remnant. The Muslims make literally the same claim. Muslims make exactly the same claim, that the original church was driven underground and they hid, and then eventually when Muhammad came on the scene, the church revealed itself through Muhammad, because Muhammad had the true belief. They had resurrected and held on to this true belief through Muhammad, because the church was originally Muslim, just so you know. Muslims say exactly the same thing in their writings. So the church was a small hidden remnant. So this argument puts forward that the true church existed in a continuous, but very largely invisible form, comprised of groups like the Waldensians, the Lollards, or the Hussites, who preserved the apostolic faith outside of the corrupt Catholic institution. That's the one claim. Now, the guy that I silenced for 24 hours, I put him on 24-hour mute. He was claiming that I was making false claims. I know, I was repeating statements made by the enemies of the Catholic Church. In this case, the Protestants. I was simply stating because that's exactly what the history shows us. So it wasn't about me making false claims. It was simply me saying these are the arguments put forward by the reformers. So yeah, I hope one day you learn to listen a little more carefully. Porfirio says, the same people that will claim to be followers of the teachings of Jesus are the same that will lie and spread false history about Catholicism. Yeah, thou shalt not bear false witness. I just read the poll on vast numbers of Prots that don't believe Jesus is the Son of God. 73% of them, 73%. So American Christianity is in deep trouble. Yeah, we have Protestants, so they're clearly the church that does everything in the manner of the early church, but none of them can agree what the early church did because they all differ. Okay, so the biblical contradiction, right? So this directly contradicts the biblical promise in Matthew 16:18, where Christ says, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So if the church was reduced to a scattered, persecuted underground minority for over 1,000 years, it implies that the gates of hell, the forces of falsehood and corruption, did in fact prevail against the visible historical institution of the church. Jesus didn't found an invisible church. He gave authority to his apostles and his leaders. So then you have the historical problem. There is none. There is no historical evidence of a single unified underground Protestant church. There's none. These proto-Protestant groups all held beliefs that were mutually exclusive to each other and rejected by later reformers, like the Anabaptist view of baptism. So these groups that the Protestants pointed to as authentic Christians or hidden Christians or underground remnants or whatever the terms they used, the story they made up, these groups themselves were very much in contradiction with each other, as well as with actual Protestant doctrine. And these were Gnostics. So yeah, it was all rather, it's again, rather sad and unfortunate. So furthermore, attributing a Protestant identity to them is anachronistic. They were not Protestants in the 16th century sense. So, okay, so now the true church was lost, supposedly, and then restored. That's the whole restorationist thing. And this argument suggests that the true church, with its correct doctrine, then vanished from the earth, disappeared for a period of time, and was then restored by figures like Luther, Calvin, and the 5-year-old Zwingli. Now, the logical contradiction here is that this argument makes Christ's promises again seem false or temporary. So if the church is the pillar and bulwark of the truth, as in 1 Timothy 3:15, and if this pillar and bulwark could fail and be corrupted to the point where its core doctrines were completely lost, then the entire concept of an infallible, divinely guided institution collapses. And of course, if it's maintained by these remnants, why don't these remnants agree on anything? They're all over the place. Yeah, where's the Injil? I'm still waiting for that. Yeah, that's a very good point. I'd love to see it. So yes, they are admitting that Jesus failed in protecting the church. So let's continue. So the church becomes a temporary, human-run project that failed, and thus it could repeatedly fail, right? It is not a perpetual institution promised by God, and therefore anybody could at any time pop up and say, hey, original church here, guys, I'm founding the original church, follow me, and thousands did. So this position admits that the doctrines of sola fide and sola scriptura were novel and not part of the historical Christian consensus, right? So it conceives that the Reformation was a new event, not a continuation of something that had always existed. Because if they can't prove continuity, then they are a novelty. So this is what the question, where was your church before Luther, was designed to expose. Francisco Franco says, interesting points, Lloyd, very valid. Thank you very much. Yeah, I spent a few days working on this. So let's look at the inconsistency of apostolic lineage for Protestants. Now, historically, and as I covered in the first document, and I've covered this last year sometime, I think, the inability of Protestants to prove an apostolic lineage is not just a matter of rejecting Catholic doctrine, It's also an internal inconsistency in their own claims of being apostolic. How can you claim apostolicity if you're pointing to heretics, known heretics, who hold known Gnostic views that reject Jesus and the Trinity and reject his incarnation? How can you then claim that that is apostolic truth? This makes no sense whatsoever. So Valina says, Allah failed to protect the Quran. Sounds similar too. Yeah, that's, yeah. Markov Blades says their claims make God a liar, yet they claim sola scriptura while ignoring God's promises. Ignoring 1,500 years of church history is crazy. And that's a very good point. That's a fair point. Let's continue. So the apostolicity of doctrine claim, right? Protestants often counter the need for physical succession by saying, but we've got, we don't have sure. We've faked and lied about and provably fabricated myths about our apostolic lineage through a bunch of heretics. But you see, that's not important. What's important is we have apostolicity of doctrine. We have the original doctrine. I know that we said that we get our doctrine from these heretics that don't believe in Jesus, don't believe in God, say that God is an evil God of matter who is actually Satan. I know that we said that we belong to guys and we descend from guys who said that, but you see, our biblical doctrine is 100% apostolic. We have the original. Why would I buy that story? But that's the story they went with. They have apostolicity of doctrine. See, we're biblical. That's the term they use today. We're a Bible-based church. I'm a Bible believer. Yeah, I can't prove apostolicity because we gave up on that lie a long time ago, but we're biblical. So they claim to hold to the same beliefs as the apostles, even if they don't have a direct line to the bishops, because they're biblical. Because now you don't have to prove anything. You just make an assertion. I have God on speed dial. So, yeah, matter is evil. That's Gnosticism, right? Yes. That's one of the major tenets. There is no change. We're just fake apostolic succession. Yeah, that's exactly right. William Palmer, enough. Okay, enough. So they rely on the assumption, right? So they rely on the assumption that they, 1,500 years later, have a more accurate understanding of what the apostles taught than the generations of bishops, theologians, early church figures, the followers of the apostles who then carried on that message, right? And people who were closer to the apostolic era, they claim that 1,500, 1,600, 1,700 years later, they have a better understanding than the early church fathers. So this is a huge leap. William Palmer, I'm going to silence you for, I'm going to put you in timeout. Excellent, thank you. Okay, so now it's a very large logical leap to assume that the correct interpretation of the Bible was lost to the entirety of Christendom, everybody, for 1,500 years. That's a huge assumption, and that's, I think, a massive assertion to make that, but 10 years after Jesus died, the church disappeared. And everything went underground to a bunch of heretics, and suddenly it was all rediscovered 1,500 years later, and these reformers now have the accurate, correct. Yeah, so I have no idea what Mr. Palmer was on. So the core of the issue is that Protestantism as a movement must either claim a historical lineage that it cannot prove and has not been able to prove. We've got the document that I first referenced that I showed you shows 200 years of attempts that were proven to be fabrications. Or they must admit to being a new theological creation. Then it isn't innovation. It's new. It's novel. So welcome, Janice. Good to see you. So the historical evidence does not support a continuous unified Protestant church existing before the Reformation. So the logical conclusion is that the doctrines and ecclesial structure of Protestantism were novel developments, not a rediscovery of an ancient but hidden truth. Of course, we know that Gnosticism believes in hidden knowledge, but yeah, this is not a hidden truth that they just suddenly uncovered. They have no apostolic lineage, so therefore they are novel. So the question, where was your church before Luther, was a very devastating question for these Protestants, these reformers, precisely because it forced a confrontation with this historical and logical reality. This is why Martin Luther insisted that people don't listen to the church fathers, but listen to Luther and reject history and reason. So where was your church before Luther? So we're going to look at so I'm working here on this document to expose the logical failures and genuine heretical claims, as you've seen, I think, in Protestant attempts to establish pre-Reformation legitimacy. And so this is based on S.J. Barnett's critical analysis, right, from 1999. And that's a document any of you can find. Where was your church before Luther by S.J. Barnett. So yeah, does all of this make good sense so far? I know some of you have commented that yes, it does. I have 38 slides in this. I don't think I'll finish them all in one sitting. But do you see that this should make logical and historical sense? That Protestants, and there are no denominations that are spared from this. All of them are guilty. Every single one was making these claims in the 1600s to 1800s. Now, they may be long forgotten, but this is the legacy and the history of these Protestant churches. So the Catholic challenge, right? So they asked this question to demonstrate the historical existence of their beliefs and communities prior to the 16th century Reformation. And they wanted evidence of a continuous visible church lineage, that predated Martin Luther, right? And apostolic succession is the idea that true Christian teachings and authority were handed down in an unbroken line from the apostles. And if Protestants cannot trace their origins back before Luther, their claim to succession back to Jesus and the apostles is in question. Again, so we've covered this. They either have to admit novelty or they have to fabricate historical continuity. And they chose to fabricate historical continuity. That is documented, unfortunately. So, yeah, and all of these claims of proto-Protestant groups, there's nothing in the historical record to support these claims. Let me see. Yeah, so how does one explain Europeans going to India and finding the Catholic Church founded by St. Thomas practicing a faith in the same manner as the Catholics from 1500 years prior? That's a very good historical question. And Philip is going to do his fourth Camino soon. Great. Okay, so let's continue. So there's inherent contradiction in Protestant ecclesiology, right? They emphasize an invisible church of true believers, but they want to prove a visible historical lineage. But they want to then claim that they are biblically correct. And how do you don't have a church then? That is merely just assertions of opinion, right? So you've got a contradiction. Either the church is visible and continuous, or it is invisible and untraceable. If it's untraceable, it's very convenient that you cannot prove or disprove anything against it. But you can't be true both ways. It's either visible and continuous, or it's invisible and untraceable. So again, remember, their strategy was to delegitimize the Catholic Church and not to defend their church. So they would claim continuity through proto-Protestant groups, but of course that did not work out very well. They selectively appropriated medieval sects as spiritual ancestors, right? They had certain groups they claimed were forerunners while overlooking all of the things in those groups that conflicted with Protestant doctrine, conflicted with basic biblical Christianity. And movements, once condemned as heretical, were then recast as misunderstood champions of true Christianity. Was Martin Luther guilty of that? Yes, definitely guilty. Right, so then a new narrative is built to sidestep the Catholic Church's claim to exclusive apostolic succession, because they've got to delegitimize that view, and then they've got to assert their own view. So my thinking here is that you hear lots of claims from Protestants that delegitimize Catholic history, that delegitimize the Pope and so on, and the magisterium and such. But it would be interesting, I thought, for me to look at what is the legitimacy then of the Protestant claim. And the historical legitimacy is zero. There is none. It doesn't have one. So there's the emphasis on the invisible church to explain lack of institutional continuity. So the idea of an invisible church justifies the absence of a visible, organized Protestant presence before the Reformation. And then, of course, they play the victim card. They claim, yeah, we were suppressed and went underground. And then they point to these heretical groups that clearly are not Christian. And, of course, then you have strategic amnesia. So they forget these inconvenient facts, and all of these uncomfortable contradictory evidence from history is ignored, minimized, or swept under the rug. The Waldensian myth, of course, this is all fabricated, right? These views on these views of the Waldensians, as we covered, are completely contrary to that of even just basic Christian understanding. So they romanticized the portrayal of Waldensian persecution as proto-Protestant martyrdom. Oh, look how evil the Catholic Church is against these really good Christians, except these really good Christians were not even Christian. So their suffering is depicted as evidence of their supposed Protestant identity. Look how evil the Catholic Church was against true Christians. Okay? And even when their beliefs were in contradiction to even Reformation theology. So they create an artificial continuity through this historical revisionism. And let me just see. Okay, so Francisco says, "True Lord, I was born Roman Catholic, and growing up in America, Protestants always shamed me, and even the public schools attack Catholic history." I've noticed that, yeah. So they made the church invisible and Gnostic because there was no proof for historical legitimacy. Yes, pretty much that's what the evidence does seem to lean to. So, of course, they would selectively quote the Waldensians and the Paulicians and the Henricians and you take your pick. And, of course, they also do so for the Church Fathers. So this is not a different approach. It's just the same idea that was applied to heretics, then the same idea, the same concept of paraphrasing, false quotes, selective quoting is then applied to the Church Fathers to bolster their particular theology. So you get that. Now, Protestant writers praised Albigensian purity and their opposition to Rome. If you read the document that I started with, where was your church before Luther? One of the major criteria for being a Protestant and for these, when the Protestants formed these umbrella groups, when they formed like a union of churches, the only criteria that you needed to join these unions was not a continuity of doctrine or similarity of doctrine. You just had to be anti-Catholic. Right, I've covered this previously. I went through the document in detail. I went through the entire document in my talk with Mel. So I don't want to repeat the document here. I'm trying to tackle a different angle on this. But the requirement was just be anti-Catholic and you're in the club. Hate Catholics and you're good. Doesn't matter whether you believe Jesus was a purple-haired dog that was sent down by Jesus to lick everybody's faces and give them salvation that way. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You just had to hate Catholics. That was it. And you were good. So these people, these Albigensians and Waldensians and all sorts of crazy Gnostic groups were then champions of reform. They were suppressed and murdered by the nasty Catholic Church. That was the story. So they also deliberately ignored Albigensian Manichaean dualism. Manichaeism, yeah. So they overlook or downplay the Albigensians' core belief in Manichaean dualism. The idea that the material world is evil, not good, and created by a lesser God, which is fundamentally at odds with Orthodox Christianity, because the lesser God is a dark God who defied the original God, the good God of light and spirit, and Yahweh is the dark, evil God who created the earth, the God of matter, the God of evil. He created corruption. So that's the Albigensian belief, but Protestants were going, yeah, those are the good Christians, which is bizarre. Now, John Wesley, something I'd look at probably in the future, but John Wesley, the Methodist, he praised medieval Manichaeism. Manichaeanism is a heretical belief. It is a Gnostic belief, a dualistic belief, as I've just described. And it is also part and parcel of Islamic history. These ideas made their way into Islam, as I've covered in the past. Now, John Wesley, he founded Methodism, went so far as to commend aspects of medieval Manichaeism, despite its radical departure from Christian doctrine. And this just shows us the lengths that reformers would go to find historical allies. Now, there's a contradiction. They were condemning Catholic errors while praising actual heretics. They were praising actual heretics. So this is a clear inconsistency here in denouncing Catholic teachings as corrupt or heretical, while simultaneously these major Protestants, Wesley and Calvin and Luther and so on, were venerating groups like the Albigensians whose beliefs were even further removed than the claims they were making about the Catholics. These beliefs were completely off the wall, but they were going, yeah, those are good Christian beliefs. Now, there's an Anglican covered in the document called A. Blackamore, and he condemned the Protestants. So he, in contrast, he openly condemned the Albigensians as heretics. He went against his peers in this, and he exposed the lack of consensus and coherence among Protestant scholars regarding which historical groups should be embraced as spiritual ancestors. So yeah, let me just catch up with the comments. Ora says, reminds me of Gortland's recent video. Oh, G. Ortland, yeah, proving sola scriptura. I have listened to a lot of Gavin Ortland. He's a good speaker. He speaks well. I think he is slippery as an eel caked in grease. Honestly, there's something about this guy that just gives me the shivers, man. I'm like, I don't believe a word he says. Speaks well, makes nice videos. I don't believe a word the man says. He spent a major section at start going off the Catholic positions, not giving a positive case. Yeah, things did not change, and that is a fair statement, I believe. Villainous says, to me it seems a lot about power. I want religious power, not an elected pope. Makes sense, seeing Protestants connected with secular power straight away and then making war. Yeah, that very much happened. Have I missed anything? Maria Torres says, I was Protestant and always defended Catholics and would even explain to them their beliefs because they were taught wrong about what Catholics believe. Everybody's always working out who's teaching truth. Yeah, well, there's a lot of badly catechized Catholics. I will admit that. I've come across that. There's a lot of badly catechized Catholics. Let me see. Have I missed any comments? Okay, no. So, guys, this will making... Oh, Janice has changed devices for a comment. So good luck, Janice. I hope it works now. And thanks for joining us. So, guys, does all this make sense so far? I mean, I've spent about, 1 hour, 5 minutes? Good grief. I'm not sure I'll finish it today. I'm one more slide and I'll be halfway. But does it all make sense? Does this make rational sense to you? While I'm at this, would anybody like to come up? Villainous, would you like to come up and make any comments on this, or anyone? I can give everyone a couple of minutes to share their thoughts if you want. Francisco says, thank you very much. He said, Lloyd speaks the truth. They were off the wall, way further and way more alien. Yeah, distinctly, definitively anti-Christian. Yes. Drink some water, Lloyd. And yes, it does make sense. I shall do so. You know what? I'm going to drink some water right now. I have my special Muhammad water. I got this from the Zamzam one. You can see it's the special yellow color, imported all the way from Saudi Arabia, because I hear Muhammad says it's good for you. Nutty. Villainous says, I've moved recently, Lloyd, and not set up yet. Okay. Yep. So, guys, hopefully this does make sense then. I'll go on for a little bit more. So you cannot claim heretical ancestors as orthodox predecessors. I mean, that's just, come on. I don't have to explain that, do I? So you can't claim continuity with groups whose doctrines, such as dualism and rejection of Jesus, rejection of the Trinity, rejection of Jesus as an actual human being, stands in direct opposition to both Catholic and Protestant orthodoxy. I mean, these ideas that are bizarre, but Catholics bad, these guys, these are our Christian forebears. That makes no sense. Sharon says, Maria, I've had problems too, e.g. Vatican II. Oh, too many coddling that are laughing, Catholic charities, but I'm still a Catholic. Look, humans are fallible, right? The institution will remain. Humans cannot expect perfection. But if you jump out of the ship and you take a little rowboat, you are no longer part of that ship. You're no longer part of that group that's on that ship. You've started a new thing. That's exactly the case with the Reformation. I mean, logically speaking, they jumped overboard and they started their own thing. Do you accept Protestants as fellow Christians? I mean, if you look at the Catholic position on this, of course they do. They accept them as fellow Christians. They'll say they have an incomplete truth. Now, I've covered Martin Luther. We bought the entirety of Martin Luther's works. I've spent the last 4 years reading it. I've read through multiple sections of biographies of Martin Luther. The man was, politely put, wrong. When I start finding Martin Luther to be correct about something, that'll be fun to find. But so far, all I can find is that theologians, historians, and popular narratives about Martin Luther are nothing short of just fabrications, garbage, and lies. So, yeah, they are. These people are very sincere. But look, they're also very sincere people who wanted to change the world, do something important, went to, let's say, climb up Mount Everest very sincerely and are dead, because sincerity doesn't guarantee success, nor does it guarantee correctness, nor does it guarantee good preparation, nor does it guarantee good sense. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So people can have good intentions and be completely wrong and fall off a cliff. So let me see. Peridot says, welcome, Karan. Yeah, it does make sense. I'd like to revisit the show. My eyes are being opened. Thanks, Lloyd. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I covered the actual document itself previously with Mal. So now I'm just doing another take on this. I'm trying to go back to some old things. Luther was more than a little bit loony. I can tell you that. The man was more than just a little insane. If your doctrine was apostolic, you should be able to show a doctrinal lineage, just like with that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue. So let me go a couple more slides at least. So why the praise of Manichaeism is shocking? I mean, this is not John Wesley, So it's a dualistic religion that was founded in the 3rd century by Mani. It was taught that the universe was the battleground between two equal and opposing forces. Right? A good spiritual God and an evil material creator. You know him as Yahweh, the guy in the Bible. That's the bad guy, just so you know. This worldview contradicts the foundational Christian belief in a one, all good, all powerful, all loving creator who declared creation very good in Genesis 1:31. Right? So for centuries, the church, both East and West, condemned Manichaeism as a grave heresy. And of course, John Wesley comes along and Martin Luther come along and they go like, yeah, that's good stuff. I don't know. Usually the Catholic Church was just persecuting these good Christians, driving them underground, and they were true Christians, and that's how we get the apostolic lineage. So the Nicene Creed, which is the bedrock of Orthodox Christianity, affirms a belief in one God, the Father, the Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible, seen and unseen. Manichaean dualism denies the goodness of the material world. It rejected the incarnation, God becoming flesh in Christ. Many of these groups, several of these groups that the Protestants praised as the original good apostolic Christians that were driven underground by the Catholics, denied Jesus was born, denied Jesus was real, denied the incarnation, denied Jesus was the Son of God. A little odd to take that position, but yeah, they did it. And they undermined the resurrection of the body or rejected it completely. And these are all core doctrines of both Catholicism and Protestantism. But the Protestant church fathers all said, this is good stuff. Yeah, those Catholics are evil, but these Manichaeans, number one, we're with those guys, which is completely retarded. So when Protestants like John Wesley praise the purity or the spirituality of medieval Manichaeans, like the Albigensians, it is very shocking. It's a theological contradiction because they're supporting a movement whose core beliefs are incompatible to Christianity. I mean, they're literally antichrist ideas, right? It's not just incompatible with Catholicism, it's incompatible with basic Christian doctrine. They were literally antichrist. And they undermined even Protestant principles, right? By embracing groups that deny the incarnation, the sacraments, the goodness of creations, they undermined the very biblical and creedal foundations that they were claiming to restore. I mean, seriously, the founders of Protestantism were a bunch of whack jobs. I don't know how often I've said that here, and I've brought so much evidence. These people were nut jobs. They were theological retards. I grew up my whole life, what little I knew of Martin Luther until a few years ago. Great theologian, greatest theologian to ever live. When you actually read Martin Luther or read Zwingli, you realize these people are idiots. They're the dumbest failures in class to ever put a word to paper. These are, seriously, they're the stupidest people I've ever read. So yeah, besides the Quran, which is another level of stupid. So let me see, where am I? Okay. Okay, yeah, so yeah, Jesus didn't say that the Catholic Church he set up with the 12 apostles, the universal church, wouldn't work. Yeah, Jesus didn't say, guys, you guys are going to go underground, you're going to have to hide in caves forever and ever, and then in the 1500s, just wait 1500 years, just chill, cool your heels, like just sit back, relax, and in 1500 years, Luther's going to fix that for you. That's not in the Bible, right? The church is supposed to endure. Okay, so good point. Yeah, be like atheism. Stop believing in God. Start believing in anything. Stop being associated with the apostolic church. Believe any old random thing. Nathaniel, the Catholic Church was doing some crazy stuff, though. The Reformation wasn't unprovoked. The Reformation was, look, I think we can honestly at this point say that the Reformers had their heads up their asses, right? And the Reformers were talking a lot of poop. And the Reformation was in many cases unprovoked, because I think if we start to look at the remember, the whole point of the Reformation and the Reformers was because they couldn't find any legitimate authority or historical legitimacy for their position, they had to attack and lie about the Catholic Church. So most of what, for instance, take the black, the black legend, take the Spanish Inquisition. Now, I have a ton of material. I have hundreds of pages of material on the Spanish Inquisition that I spent months going through. I know I've never presented it. I've had it at least ready for the last 2 years or something. I haven't now formatted it, but I have 95%, 98% of what we've been told about the Spanish Inquisition was nothing but Protestant lies. Lies, lies, and lies. The Protestant reformers were liars, liars, and liars. That's it. So they smeared, they lied, they fabricated, and I'm not sure that I would want to take claims that have been standing for so long unexamined by claimants that are clearly fraudsters. Martin Luther was a fraudster. I've covered Martin Luther. I've got 30 plus hours of Martin Luther on my channel. Martin Luther was a vindictive, narcissistic, murderous, utterly depraved, completely immoral theological fraud. I mean, that's the conclusion I've come to from reading Martin Luther's own works. Now, you may not like to hear that, but I've covered that extensively. So on my channel, from Martin Luther's own mouth. I mean, the man was reprehensible. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to be convinced by people wanting to point fingers over there when they cannot defend themselves. Their own claims are clearly fraudulent. Their own claims are fabricated. Their own history is even worse, far worse in many ways. So yeah, so before I take these claims at face value, I think if we look at it, we're going to find a lot of exaggeration and just flat out lying, because that's what I've been discovering. So let me see. The English did get out of hand. Yeah, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. But look, the thing is, I don't want to get too distracted. No, the Inquisition was not targeted at Freemasons. Not that I know of. So look, let's not get too distracted. Look, I do understand people need to defend their views. Look, I'm a Protestant, right? I haven't hidden this on the channel because whatever people in the random chat people might have to say for themselves, I've never hidden what church I belong to, where I came from, what my interests are, what my thoughts. I've never hidden that. I've never been secretively like a Methodist or something and won't reveal it. And I know there are channels that will not talk about their beliefs. They don't want to upset everybody, right? Unfortunately, on this channel, I do upset people simply because I bring this kind of historical fact and analysis. So yeah. Well, let me see. Okay, but let me continue. Let me just continue. So let's see. So his praise shows a willingness, okay? And he's just one example of many, right? This Mr. John Wesley, it shows he was willing to overlook or excuse radical heresy, anti-Christian heresy, simply because these people were enemies of Rome. They rejected Rome. They were opposed to the Pope. So here we see a double standard in Protestant polemics, right? The move was scandalous not only to Catholics, but also to many Protestants. They recognized that Manichaean dualism was foreign even to the Reformation's own confessions and catechisms. And Protestant praise of Manichaeism was a desperate attempt to find historical forerunners at any expense, right? And this was at the expense of basic Christian truths. So this showed the dangers of letting anti-Catholic polemics override theological integrity, and they were willing to do it. Is the man guilty of it? Yes, he is. Many of them are. So let me continue. Okay, so Francis says, I'm surprised you're a Protestant, Lloyd. Not hating, just surprised. No, it's just that, look, I mean, I think anyone can pick up a history book and read. Anyone can use basic Aristotelian logic, just the basic laws of logic, and apply them. Anyone can go through papers that exist now in the day of the internet. You can find material that was very hard to find before. You can now just do a search and you can find things. You can ask better questions. We have tools that can sift through lots of mountains of data. And also, when I grew up high church Anglican, which is in many ways, at least outwardly, at least on the surface, very, very similar to the Catholic Church. The services are very, very similar, almost word for word. It's like 95% the same service. If you go to a reverend sort of mass, then the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church are almost interchangeable. It's almost identical. It's crazy how similar they are. because the Protestant church, the Anglican church as a Protestant church, wanted to be like Catholicism without the Pope. Now it's the church of woke and gay, pretty much, and has fallen off a cliff. I mean, good grief. But the beliefs are very, very compatible with Catholic doctrines. Although I always wondered why my family, I've got bishops and priests in the church. So my family was very much involved and very high in the church. I mean, I've had lunch and dinner with Desmond Tutu and so on. So I've always wondered why my family was always so anti-papal, but also why they were so very cautious with the early church fathers. They were very careful about reading it, because I just eventually got the feeling that they didn't want to find things that were going to make them uncomfortable about their beliefs. Francisco said that makes sense. So let me see. What are the 7 churches in Revelation? Well, they're not Rome, that's for sure, as far as I can tell. But anyway, but look, the thing is, why would I want to listen to a bunch of people who lied about their Christian roots? Why would I listen to the guy that wanted to murder the disabled because he said their bodies are corrupted and owned by Satan, that they're indwelt by demons and they need to be killed? That's called Martin Luther, the guy who founded the Reformation. Why would I want to listen to a murderer of that type? I mean, and that's just the tip of the iceberg with this nut job that's called Martin Luther, the founder of the Reformation, the father of the Reformation. Why would I want to listen to an outright liar? Honestly, it makes no sense to me. It's like the man was a liar of note. Honestly, I've read so much of his stuff. I am sick and tired of the man. And I cannot, everyone goes, well, we've got to find something nice to say about him. No, the man was sick. The man was sick. I've covered so much of his evil. The man had a filthy mouth. He was sick. He was evil. And he lied. He was happy to lie. He liked it. Okay, so moving on. Pentecostals, the vast majority of Pentecostals violate basic Christian doctrine. So when you look at the beliefs that Pentecostals hold, this goes against early church history. And the surveys, like the Ligonier surveys, just show that the vast majority of Pentecostals are all over the place. You guys can't even decide, because you have a purple Pentecostal and a blue Pentecostal and a yellow Pentecostal and an upside-down Pentecostal, raxalated Pentecostals, unraxalated Pentecostals, raxalated blue Pentecostals, raxalated spotted yellow Pentecostals. And the one believes in baptism, the other one doesn't believe in baptism. The one believes in child baptism, the one thinks that's heretical. The other one only believes in baptism over 30. The other one doesn't believe in the Eucharist. The other one does believe in whatever. You guys can't even decide what is original Christianity, because everyone's making it up as they go along. So no, I don't belong to heresies. Let's put it that way. Anglicans are the Episcopalians. Anglicans are Episcopalian, but that doesn't mean that they're the same. You get high church and low church Anglicans, and so no one mentions the libertine Protestant movement that Calvin went against. Yeah, it's Pandora's box, exactly. Okay, so let's continue. Let's just finish a little bit. So let's do a couple more slides, call it a day, and I'll do a part 2 another time. So logical contradictions. So you have Protestant claims, apostolic succession through these medieval sects. Okay, so this is well-documented history. This is not even the historical record from from the 1500s to the 1700s is hysterical. It's hysterical when you read how the story changed and how they caught out that they were lying and that they were wrong, and new evidence comes to light, and the story changed constantly. It's hysterically funny. Read the paper, Where Was Your Church Before Luther? It's well worth reading. Or watch the video that I did on it. So Protestants claim that they had apostolic succession through medieval sects, right? The reality is that those medieval sects held heretical doctrines, provably heretical doctrines, insane heretical doctrines. Protestants then claim that the Orthodox faith was preserved in these heretical groups, but then these groups rejected biblical authority as outright heretics, provably so. Then the Protestants claimed continuity with the early church. There is no evidence whatsoever of any kind of institutional continuity. I mean, someone just mentioned join the Pentecostals or whatever. I mean, please, that's just one of 5 million different Protestant branches, different groups that all contradict. They have irreconcilable contradictions. So what's true? You cannot come to any kind of agreement. You cannot agree what is first century Christianity, what is originally apostolic, because none of you can agree on anything, right? And at the point we have a disagreement, that guy starts a new church. It's that simple. So yeah, that's just opinion on steroids. And then they claim that they had continuity with the early church. Well, there was no institutional continuity. There's nothing that can be proven based on their claims. And they claimed then, of course, they had to say, well, we rely on biblical authority alone. But then, of course, that biblical alone authority, that Bible alone doctrine, has led to nothing but contradictory theological positions. Incompatible, contradictory doctrines where everyone squabbles and cannot agree on anything, even on major doctrines like salvation. So yeah, no, contradiction means there must be error. You can't have some guy saying, no, you must be baptized, and someone says, no, it's optional, you don't have to be. In fact, don't do it. And those are not nuances in terms of understand. No, those are contradictions, right? Those are total contradictions. Someone has to be wrong. Someone must be wrong. And this is where we are. Well, thank you, Christine. Yeah, Martin Luther. I'll be doing more Martin Luther soon. Possibly tomorrow with Usama. I have to confirm with him that I'll be going on with Martin Luther tomorrow with Usama. So he said he and I will talk tomorrow, and I'll let you guys know a few hours in advance. Masonic connections. I have not looked in depth on the Masonic connections. There's too much garbage out there. But if you want to start with the Masonic connections, look at Napoleon. He wasn't a Mason, but look at he used the Masons. He was very much interested in their authority to further his authority and connections. So that's a good angle to take on that. Yeah, this stuff, thank you. The Islam KKK Freemasonry talk. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's some crazy stuff happening there. Interesting. That's interesting, Philip. That was a mouthful trying to explain the denominations. Okay, so guys, tell you what, I'll call it here. We're halfway. I have 38 slides. I'm at slide 21, so I have 17 more to go. Let's stop here. I will pick this up. Tomorrow night, I'm streaming again. I have a different talk. But yeah. And then sorry, what is today? Wednesday? It's Wednesday. No, sorry, I've lost track of my days. So I will be streaming with Usama tomorrow, but I will confirm that. Otherwise, I might bring something up. Wow, thank you very much, Rick Hampstead. Thank you very, very much. Always a great show, very informative. Thanks, Lloyd. Wow, thank you very much, Rick Hampstead, for $30. Thank you. Really do appreciate it. So yeah, I will be on with Usama possibly tomorrow. I might do part 2 of this tomorrow. Otherwise, I will be on Saturday, I believe. I've said it, or Sunday. And Monday, I've got another talk with a Green Beret. We're going to be talking about information warfare. I think that'll be very interesting. The only infallible source is the Holy Bible. Yeah, but then you see, unfortunately, fallible readers read it and come up with utterly bizarre, contradictory, incompatible opinions about it. So the Bible certainly would be infallible, but the people reading it are a bunch of idiots. And therefore, they can't agree on anything, and they don't have any way to resolve disputes. There's no arbitrator. There is no adjudicator. So therefore, it's just everyone reading by opinion alone, and that's completely retarded. And I'll be talking about that more in future, as I have in the past. So yeah, thanks guys. I hope this has been enlightening, and yeah, so let us talk again soon. We'll continue with this episode, and hopefully you've learned something useful, and haven't upset and offended too many people, but hopefully it's been enlightening. So thanks guys, God bless, and I'll see you guys soon.